much weight as what I did to the actual words that Jesus Christ was saying out of his own mouth. So I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All of it was saying the same to me. I said, and I was thinking to myself, this is not what I was taught about Christianity. You know, you're taught that God is 1 in 3, 3 in 1. You know, 1, 1, 1 equals 3. You know, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Jesus died on your cross to forgive your sin. You know, and there was another thing that I noticed from the Old Testament, and this is a beautiful lesson to Muslims, because you're asked this all the time, especially when it comes to dawah. And I never put 2 and 2 together until I learned Islam and then read the Bible one more time. Is I wanted to know why the Jews wanted to crucify Jesus so bad. Why so bad? They could have just mobbed him anywhere and killed him on the street. It's not like he had clans like the Arabs that would have come and backed him up. I said, why didn't they just kill him? You know, why were they so strict and sincere to tell Pontius Pilate, you got to kill him and you need to sanction it? We can't do it, but you need to sanction it to kill him. And now I understand it, was that Jesus had a mission, and that mission was to share God with the world. And Paul even kind of tells on himself in his book of Galatians as to why Jesus was meant to be crucified, or the Jews wanted to crucify him. Paul said that the crucifixion is the stumbling block for the Jews. And he explained in Galatians that Jesus Christ, and this is how he tried to roundabout explain it, was cursed for us, to remove us from the curse of Allah by taking this curse upon us, for it is written, and he quoted the Old Testament, everything that hangeth on a tree is cursed. So I went back and studied the Old Testament and Judaic law, and I realized that people who were crucified, that was considered a curse upon them. You had to do something pretty serious to get crucifixion, because it was considered a curse from God. It was part of their law that when someone is crucified, that person is cursed. So wherever they buried these criminals, like in the graveyards in Israel, in Jerusalem, in Palestine, where they buried these criminals that were crucified, this was considered cursed ground. This was considered ground that you didn't go on, and you did nothing here, because these people are cursed by God. So I started to put 2 and 2 together. It's not that they wanted to kill Jesus, because they could have just killed him. They wanted to disprove who he was. This was their point, was to disprove who this man was. He said he's the Messiah. They wanted to disprove it, and they knew if you can crucify Jesus, he can't be the Messiah. He cannot be our Messiah if you can crucify him. And even if he is, if we can still force our crucifixion on him, then that'll detriment his message. So they understood this and knew this, and this is why they wanted to crucify him. And this is exactly why Allah saved him from it. Because everyone asks you, why did Allah save him from the crucifixion? Because you cannot crucify. That was part of his law that he came to fulfill, that he could not be cursed according to this law. He said, I have come to fulfill the law. To fulfill it. Therefore, he couldn't be cursed according to it. And this is why he went to the Garden of Gethsemane and asked God to remove this from him, because he knew how detrimental this was to his message of crucifixion. So I began to see all of these things. So I started to read, I got to the book of Acts and started to read the writings of Paul the Apostle. And things went from this to this. It went from one way to another way. It went completely flipped, turned around the entire teachings. It went from obeying God, worshiping God, following the law, to worshiping Jesus Christ and abolishing the law completely. Paul even wrote to the Galatians, "Oh, you foolish Galatians, why are you still following this cursed law?" Jesus Christ came as a curse to remove us from the affliction of this curse. So I said to myself, but Jesus just said a few books before this that whosoever shall break the least of these commandments and teach men to do so shall be the least in the kingdom of heaven. And here you go, Paul preaching this gospel to abolish the law. So I even asked, what is going on here? So I started asking my pastor, and my pastor said, now you're getting into deep water. You know, now you're starting to question the New Testament. You really have some issues. You know, they even thought that I might be, you know, possessed and all kinds of things. So I had a very big conflict going on inside of me, and my friend took me to his textual critic teacher, his professor. And what this man told me probably wrecked my faith in Christianity. And I always say, I doubt he would be very happy me traveling around the world telling people that a Christian professor from Bob Jones University wrecked my faith in Christianity. But he did. Because what I asked him was what happened to all these contradictions. You know, in the Old Testament there are many contradictions. If you study Hebrew language, you'll understand that when you read some of the Old Testament or the Torah, that there are some parts of the Torah that you can see is the most beautiful Arabic that you can see, just the most beautiful Hebrew that you can see, just like when you read the Quran. It's very beautiful Hebrew. And then 2 chapters later, you'll see Hebrew that looks like a broken 3-year-old who is trying to scribble some Hebrew down. It looks very colloquial, very dialectic. You can tell it's not the same person speaking. So I went and asked him about all this stuff I saw. And he told me, he said, what you have is a book written by men over centuries and centuries and eons and eons. And he says, and this book started as an original that was copied and copied and copied, and somebody added a mistake, and somebody came behind him and corrected that mistake and added 2 of his own. Someone came and copied it and skipped a line and added a line where it wasn't supposed to be. And then someone else came and copied it and took it to his country. And in order for it to fit well with the doctrine they were teaching, he would cross out a dot here or cross out a word here or change a word here so that it would fit with the theological ideas of this part of the world. And he said, and after all these years, you have a book now that is compiled from all of this, written by the hands of men that still has men's fingerprints left on it. And that's what you have. You have an imperfect book that is only perfected through faith. This is exactly what he told me, that this book is perfected through faith. You cannot perfect it textually. It's not a textually perfect book. Those who believe in it by faith. And so I said, here we go again with this faith thing. You know, I said, God gave me a brain for a reason. If he did not want me to use it, he would remove this reason and logic part of my brain out and replace it with more faith. So, you know, and I was of the opinion, you know, as the saying goes, my grandmother didn't raise a fool. I'm no fool. You know, I said, I can't believe in this. You know, I mean, this book I've been taught is the inerrant word of God, and you're just telling me that it's a book of errors that's only perfect through faith. That's like me taking a 1982 Datsun all beat up and say, if you believe it can be a Mercedes. If you believe. You know, that would make no sense. You can't take a car to the car dealership and say that. No, if you really believe it, if you look at it right, it's a Mercedes. So I said, no, you know, this is a book full of errors. And God's religion is perfect. If God has a religion, it's perfect. If he has a book, it has to be perfect because he is perfect. So I left Christianity completely. And I decided that I was, you know, I had learned some concepts from the Bible. God was one. You couldn't fool me of that. You know, I had also consented that there should be nobody standing between me and God because he created me without permission from anyone. Therefore, I don't need to be taking permission from someone to go to him. If I had to be forgiven for something, it should come from him because on the day of judgment, it's going to be me and him alone. And I didn't know about God's prophets yet. You know, I had my doubts and persuasions about that. So I decided to start searching other religions. I went back to Judaism. I studied Judaism. I found the same thing that Jesus taught about two spiritual Jews that leave the law, and Jews that were so caught up in the law that they left no room for spirituality. I studied Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, Wiccan, Bushido. You know, everything I could get my hands on, every type of ism or religion, I studied it. But there was one litmus test that I used for every religion. And whenever I met them, or the people or whatever about this religion, I would always ask them, do you have a book? Do you have a book? Because another thing I had come to the conclusion of is that if your religion is true, you should be able to tangibly hand me something and show me that this religion is true. Give me something that I can see. I don't want to hear that faith stuff anymore. I heard that all my life, and look where it got me. It got me thinking I'm driving a Mercedes running around in 1982 beat-up Datsun. I said, no, you have to show me. And so I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Torah, I read the Scrolls of Tao, you know, I read the Code of the Bushido, I read the Wiccan Book of Spirits and Spells and all that other magic stuff they have. And I read all of these things, and I found something very congruent with all of it, was that there were very same philosophies and teachings in all of these major religious books. They all talked about God and his nature. Most of them alluded to the fact that God is one and that God sends messengers to us and people to us to teach us. But they were filled with a whole bunch of garbage, to be honest with you, that I couldn't logically, rationally believe. So at about the age of 17, just about the time, about 17 and a half, I gave up my search for God. And I became kind of angry with God because I said, here I am looking for you, and I can't find you, and it doesn't look like you're giving me any help. And I don't know how many of you know, but for a 17-year-old that is frustrated with God and the world, there's a lot of trouble he can get into. There's a lot of things he can do to put himself in predicaments when he's frustrated the world and had come to the conception that, you know, if there's a God that exists, then he doesn't really care about me. You know, that's a kind of a dangerous young man. So I started doing the whole partying, in trouble, going to parties, drinking underage, all of this stuff I started doing. You know, I'm a perfectionist at heart. So when I was a Christian, I tried to be the best one I could. If I was going to switch to being any other religion, then I was going to do that 100%. So you better believe when I went after the dunya, I did that 100%. And, you know, I was a martial artist since I was 15 years old. And even though it was only 2 years, you know, 2 years at 17, you think, you know, you're Bruce Lee. So I got into a lot of fights, got kicked out of school, had to go to another school, got in one fight, got arrested for a fight, you know, and there were a couple incidences that stopped this downward spiral because I was on a very, very quick downward spiral that would, and I believe if I would have continued on that downward spiral, I would probably end up hurting someone, killing someone, or them hurting or killing me. And there were two incidents that brought that to an abrupt stop, like pulling the emergency brake. And the first one was a car accident that I was in. My friend and I were on the way back from Clemson University from a frat party, and we were driving up 385 in South Carolina, and we were both highly intoxicated, and I decided that night that he was driving, I decided to put my seatbelt on for the only reason that I kept falling over when I fell asleep without the seatbelt on, because I didn't really believe in the seatbelt thing, because I said if I'm going to die, I'm going to die. You know, that was the conception that I come up with. It is, you know, if it's time for me to die, it's time for me to die. I didn't believe in the whole Tanya Camel thing. So I put on my seatbelt, and I fell asleep. And the next thing I know, I remember waking up with the car shaking, and I woke up to grab my friend because I thought maybe he had fallen asleep. But when I woke up, the only thing I saw was the tree line and then the pavement coming right at my face, and the window smashing and the car flipping, the whole 9 yards, and us landing in a ditch. And I remember getting out of the car. That was the first thing I thought. You know, I number one, I couldn't believe it. You know, you don't really think about, oh, you're alive. No, you just moved. I jumped out of the car and realized that I had jumped out of the back of the car that wasn't there anymore. It was still in the median on the other side of the highway, and the front part of the car was over in the ditch. And I drug my friend out, who was knocked unconscious, and pulled him over the side of the road. I had no injuries. I looked at myself trying to find what's missing, and there was nothing but a piece of glass stuck in my arm that I pulled out. And it just so happened that a state trooper was passing the other way because he turned around and came back. And when he came back, he asked what had happened. And the first thing he asked me was, did you see what happened? Because there was other people who were pulled over, so I guess he thought that I was a bystander because I started to walk towards him. He's like, did you see what happened? You know, where are the people? I said, yeah,